Good day, class. I'm really need to apologize with regards to Thursday. I actually forgot to set the system to record, and I know, Radhika, that you are dependent on this, and I'm also aware that some of the full-time students also like to look at the session all over again. So I will be doing it all over again. Of course, hope I covered everything. But all right. Okay, so last time we looked at chapter 7 relative to process and sustainability. We're now going to develop a little more and look at process in terms of capacity and also with regards to break even in terms of production level on the process. So we are going to look at capacity of a process, and then we'll look at what was designed to produce against what is the effective capacity. Also, we're going to look at bottleneck. In all systems, generally there's a bottleneck, and a bottleneck is when, just like a bottle, in terms of things that stop it from flowing. Well, in a system, there are, in most cases, there is a subsystem which causes a slowdown in the entire system, and that's generally what's referred to as a bottleneck. And then we'll look at ways to manage bottleneck. Break-even analysis. For your senior project, you are required to do your feasibility, and in your feasibility, you will be doing you will be required to do a break-even analysis in terms of the minimum production level of your particular process. And in doing that, of course, so we're going to review some of that, and you would have touched on break-even analysis most likely in ENTP 210. You may have done that in corporate finance. The multi-product or the multi-product capacity, in most cases, at least in ENTP 210, I recall that you would have done from a single product standpoint. So now we're going to look at it from a multi-product standpoint. Right, so let's look at capacity. And let's understand what is capacity. Capacity basically is throughput, meaning the number of units or number of product that any facilities or any production line can hold, receive, store, produce in a period of time. Basically, it means how much you can actually produce in any particular time. Whether it's a day, whether it is an hour, whether it is a month. And in this case, when you're doing your senior project, that's kind of like what you're required to define in terms of what is your capacity to produce. Of course, knowing that, it helps you determine in terms of your capacity and the amount to produce, helps you determine some of your fixed costs. And knowing your capacity also helps you determine whether or not the market demand is in fact can be met, and if it cannot be met, what kind of strategies that you tend to employ. And in terms of capacity, when you determine capacity, you generally look at it from 3 different standpoints. And therefore, when you're doing capacity planning in terms of long range, medium term, and short range planning, and you would have talked about in terms of those different types of planning, and you would have met it actually in principles of management, in management information system, when you talked about long-term, medium-term, and short-term decision making. And long-term planning, basically long-term decision making. And when you do long-term decision making, you're really looking at strategic, which means you're looking at whether or not you're going to set up your facilities in a particular place, whether you're going to buy massive types of big machinery, etc. And that's generally done by strategic managers. And intermediate planning, that's when you do that's middle management, and therefore you're looking at a particular department and therefore determining what equipment is required for that particular department, and therefore in terms of meeting the production line for that department, whether you're going to be adding a shift, etc. So it helps you basically determine inventory, resources, etc. And in short-term planning is immediate in terms of operational manager, and this is what our class is all about, operational management. So therefore, we're really going to be looking at in terms of planning on that perspective, in terms of scheduling your job, and therefore scheduling resources relative to your job, etc. Right, so let's talk about system design or design capacity and effective capacity, and understand the difference. All resources, all systems are designed to perform in a particular way, and therefore design capacity is the maximum theoretical output of a system or a process. Assuming a car engine. Car engine was designed to, to run probably at 300 miles per hour. Therefore, that's what theoretically, and car will be the maximum in terms of theoretical limit that it could actually run will be 300 miles per hour. But effective capacity is actually different because while it's designed to run at 300 miles per hour, there are limitations. And therefore, within the constraints, and some would be either mechanical constraints, or it could be, of course, in our instance here, it's legal constraints. You're not required, you cannot drive more than 80 miles per, sorry, 80 kilometers, which is 50 miles. 50 miles per hour, and therefore the effective capacity of that engine really is 50 miles per hour because it was designed. It was why it was designed for 300. The law says that you cannot go at, or you should not go at more than 80 kilometers per minute, and therefore effective capacity means that while you are designed for this, you could only do this based on particular limitation. Or even if you could have operated at 300 miles per hour, after a while, based on wear and tear, you will not be able to reach that, and therefore that's actually the limitations. Or it could be whoever is driving it. One person can drive, a very experienced driver, like a race car driver, will be able to go up to 300, but somebody who is a novice or somebody who is relatively inexperienced or who just don't want to drive that way will not drive at 300 miles per hour, and therefore the effective capacity of that particular individual in that particular process, in that particular context, is going to be less. So effective capacity is generally less than design capacity. Now, having designed something, you can then say, well, if I design, let's say, your blender or your printer, I design it to be able to produce or to print at 20 pages per minute. But in terms of the printer, I don't really use it or whole day. So while it's designed to produce at 20 pages per minute, it means if I'm running that constantly, I would be running it 20 pages per minute, and effectively I have 60 seconds, 60 minutes in 1 hour, so I would be doing 60 by 20 pages per minute. Now, for in that hour, how much am I utilizing that particular equipment? So really and truly, I print probably 3 times to that printer, and therefore my utilization of that printer will be, if I'm printing 3 times and I print 20 page, so my utilization is 20 page divided by 20 multiplied by 60. So that's how much I utilize the equipment. Now, on the other hand, my efficiency, so while it was designed and that gives my utilization, my efficiency is, while I have this printer and this printer was designed for 20 pages, because it's 10 years old, 5 years old, it could only do 10 pages per minute. So my effective capacity of that printer was not 10 pages, 20 pages, but 10 pages. So while it was designed for 20, the effective capacity is 10 pages. And therefore my efficiency in terms of how efficient I am in terms of using that resources will then be, since I'm printing 20 pages, is 20 pages divided by 60 multiplied by 10. And therefore that's my efficiency. So efficiency is based on a factor of effective capacity, and utilization is based on a factor of design capacity. So output is always the main measure, and therefore depends on what your output is, you're utilizing it based on your design capacity. Depend on what your output is in terms of your efficiency, is utilizing it based, basically your efficiency is based on your effective capacity. So let's kind of work out this example, and well, of course, you can work it out. We did in class, and then in terms of looking at it, in most cases, the questions or the system, well, the question would tell you in terms of what it was designed for, and most likely what the output is, and then you may be asked to figure out what would have been utilization and efficiency. And in fact, this is actually what it is here. So Sarah Bakery is producing breakfast roll, and she wants to be able to understand her capacity. So determine the design capacity, the utilization, the efficiency. Last week, the facilities produced 148,000 rolls. The effective capacity is 175,000. The production line operates at 7 days per week with a 3 8-hour shift per day. And the line was designed to process these rolls at a rate of 1,200 per hour. Okay, so the question gives you what it was designed to do. And it was designed to do 1,200 per hour. And we are trying to figure out what is the design capacity what's the design capacity for the week. So if it was 1,000 per hour, and then for the week, it simply be 1,200 per hour. How many hours in a day? 8 hours, 24 hours. So 1,200 multiplied by 24 for the day. And then how many days in a week? We've got 7 days in a week. So it's 1,200 multiplied by 24 multiplied by 7. And that's the design capacity. Utilization is output over design capacity. So information was given last week, it produced 148,000. So utilization would be output over what we just calculated as our design capacity. And then efficiency is a factor of capacity, of effective capacity. So effective capacity is determined, effective capacity is a factor of it, and therefore if the production line operates at 7 days per week with 3 8-hour shifts, we can then calculate our effective capacity from that. So we've got 8-hour shift per day, and then it's producing 1,200 per hour. So it's 8 hours in a day, 1,200 multiplied by 8. We are running it by 3 shifts. So it's 1,200 by 8 multiplied by 3, and that's for 1 day. And then if we are doing it for 7 days for the week, it would be 1,200 multiplied by 8 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 7. And that will be your effective capacity. Now, you can get efficiency. Efficiency is output over effective capacity, and they give us the output, which is 148,000, and that divided by that will give us the efficiency. So basically, the same thing that I just told you here. So your actual design capacity, as I told you before, 7 days a week, three shifts is being run, and 7 days a week, 3 shifts by 8 multiplied by 12, and that's what it was designed to do. Utilization is a factor of design. Efficiency is a factor of effective capacity. Okay? Right. So in terms of answering the question, due to an anticipated decrease in demand, the firm is considering dropping one of its shifts. So what will be the capacity if they do that? So instead of multiplying by 3, you multiply by 2, and therefore it would be less. So therefore, which means that your design capacity would actually be less. And therefore, if you're operating at 3 shifts with 1 day, so you're just changing around the equations, okay? Now, capacity decisions, basically, this is actually blocking us, so let's move this out of it. Yeah, there we go. Right. So in terms of your capacity, depends, but capacity is how much you can produce in terms of the day. And therefore, of course, it will determine your all decisions in terms of management decisions. It will affect your forecasting because in terms of you have to forecast to produce, and therefore it can definitely tell you in terms of what level you need to operate at. Okay, what's the problem and why are we not moving? Here we go. Okay. Now, of course, while you are designing something to produce a particular way, depend on the systems. A system has a limit. All system has a limit. So let's okay. Now let's look at a car. Your car was designed. That's a poor example. Okay, ah let's look at your oven. Your oven, you're cooking, and you've got a 24-inch oven, which is smaller than a 60-inch cubic feet oven. And therefore, in terms of the amount of, well, let's look, in terms of the amount of cakes that you can put into the oven, if you put 2 cakes, you're still not getting economy of scale, but it means if you try to, if you, okay, that's a poor excuse, all right. um, yeah, well, okay, let's continue with that example in the sense that after, if you put more than an oven, if you've got 3 shelves, it would actually take, let's say, 4 and 4 is 8 and 4 is 12. You can fit up to 12 cakes into an oven, but if you are trying to do more than 12 cakes at the same point in time, assuming you need to do 20 cakes, you will not be able to fit 20 cake inside of that oven, and therefore you will not have what is called economy of scale. So under 20, we would not have, basically you are running it at a loss because you're not maximizing it. 20 is the maximum limit, but if you do more than, if you do more than 12, you would in fact cannot do more than 12. It means that you have to bake twice, or you would either have to get a bigger oven. And therefore, all systems basically have that, which means that there is a limit to all production level, and that's the maximum that you could actually do at that point in time. So, which means that in terms of that maximum limit, then it means that basically you need to do appropriate forecasting. Or if you reach that maximum limit, but you need to do more, then from a management strategy, there are different things that you can actually do. Therefore, you could reduce demand by raising your price, or you can try to look at some way to increase your capacity. If, on the other hand, your capacity in terms of how much you could produce exceeds demand, then you come up with some marketing strategy to be able to stimulate the market for them to buy more. Which basically is what you're noticing now, that in most cases a lot of stores are offering sale because they've got a lot of product and they want to stimulate sales, and therefore that's what they're doing. Or you could try to go to a different product change and therefore do something that is different. Of course, with seasonal product, you try, of course, to look at, because you know there'll be ups and downs with regards to the capacity demand for a particular product based on a different time, and therefore, which means in those cases, when we did forecasting, basically, remember we talk about seasonal and therefore having different product line at the same point in time. When you have less product, then you go to a different product line. And in fact, this is the example here that tells you if you have a product like this, like the example used in the book is in terms of jet ski. And there are periods and times when, of course, you could only use jet ski. Well, this is actually in the States and not in Trinidad. We could use it 24, all 12 months of the year. But in North American environment, you could only use the jet ski for probably about 6 months in a year. And therefore, or 6 to 9 months, depends on if you're willing to brave the cold. But in a period in time when there is, when you're not going to be using a jet ski, then of course, when there's snow, you'll then use the snowmobile. So which means in those instances, that's like when you do a different product line. And therefore, other strategies for matching, ensure that your capacity meets demand, then it means that sometimes what you may have to do is make staffing change. So, for instance, after you observe the production and realize that your staffing is not as efficient, then of course you change staff, or you're not meeting demand even though your staffing is efficient and you need to add more staff. And while we've got nice processes, like in Subway has a very nice process, and that's one of the main problem in terms of the efficiency of Subway is because they don't have sufficient staffing inside of there. Or you could look at your equipment, and the example I use with the oven and the cake. To be able to meet the demand in one particular hour, then of course you buy another oven, so which means you could buy additional equipment. Or if you don't want to buy, you can probably, or if you have too much, but you can lease out what you have, and therefore sell or lease, or try to see if there's ways to improve your process on the whole. Or let's see in terms of redesigning your product, which means that in terms of round cakes, 4 cakes could have fit on one shelf. But if I redesign my cake and I made them in rectangle in terms of loaf pans, I would be able, instead of putting 4 round cakes, I can put um, as much as eight or more rectangle cakes. So I can actually redesign my product to be able to fit what I have. Well, you could add process flexibility in terms of doing things at different point in time. Or if you can't meet demand, of course you close. Right. And therefore, other strategies again in terms of managing demands, especially in the service sector. And that's kind of like why you'll have appointments. So instead of having everybody come at the same point in time, you ensure that people have appointments, or you could let them reserve and have reservations, or you can do the first come, first serve rule. In terms of capacity again, you could, if you can't meet demand, then of course you could hire part-time or temporary staff, etc. And therefore, when in times when the demand is run low, then it's relatively easy to, well, in terms of part-time staff, they're not full-time, and therefore, well, your composition in terms of staffing, in terms of that. Right. So let's look at a system now and try to figure out how, therefore, can we manage a system in terms of bottleneck. So all work areas have its own unique capacity in terms of what it can do. And therefore, capacity analysis means let's try to figure out how efficient we are in terms of operating our subsystems or workstations in a system. Now, in all systems, there might be a bottleneck. Or let's say, if we look at the subway system, in most cases, the bottleneck at Subway is at the cashier. Because what is required at the cashier in Trinidad, that is, in addition to cashing, in most cases they are required to serve the drink. So they're doing 2 sub-process, which is why that one person or that one workstation, therefore, is doing more than the other workstation. So therefore, the bottleneck seems to be at the cashier. And therefore, the bottleneck depends on the bottleneck that basically determines how much you can do. Now, the process time of a station, which means each workstation, so let's say the cashier was doing cashing and serving drink, and that's one workstation. The first workstation would be in terms of when they take the order. That person may take the order, and in general, when they take the order, they go and get the bread, and therefore that's one workstation, and you actually have one person who might be putting out the vegetables and another person who's putting out the meats. So each one of that individual who's manning these different processes would be referred to as a workstation. So the process time of a workstation is how long each one of those individual does the different assignments that they're required to do. The process time of a system, on the other hand, is assuming constant flow. How much can come out of this full system at any one point in time? So, assuming the line was running efficiently, and therefore the person is taking the order, and they take the order and put out their bread, and that probably will take them half a minute. The guy who is serving the vegetables probably takes about another half a minute in terms of doing that. The person who is doing the meats might take, let's say, 45 minutes because they're serving the meat and they're also putting the dressing and they're asking you some questions in terms of whatever it is that you have to do. So you've got a 30 seconds, then you got a 30 seconds, and this guy is taking probably 45 seconds or a minute. Now, on the other hand, the cashier is taking your money, asking you the question as to what drink you want, and have to get up and move to go and get a drink, get the cups, get the drinks, and therefore the cashier basically is taking about 2 minutes or 2 to 3 minutes to actually take your money, give you change, put the stuff in a bag, and get the drink. So they're doing actually three different sub process, and that sub process there might actually be taking 3 minutes, let's say 2 to 3 minutes, maximum of 3 minutes. So which means that you've got half a minute, half a minute, 45 seconds, and then 3 minutes. Now, assuming constant flow, it means that sandwiches are coming here, but every time, after every 3 minutes done, one sandwich will actually be coming out. So on a constant flow, every 3 minutes, you are in fact getting a sandwich. So the process time of a system is actually 3 minutes. So the process time is really the bottleneck time. So the process time of a system is the bottleneck time, the time it takes the longest, and therefore every length, this long time, then one particular stuff is coming out. The process cycle time, on the other hand, is what is the full time. Assume one sandwich starts on the beginning all the way to the end. Then the process cycle time for one sandwich is taking the order, getting the bread, putting the vegetables, putting the meat, bagging it, getting the drinks, and then taking your money, and then you go out. And therefore, that's the process cycle time. So it's the full time of one sandwich from your order all the way through, and therefore that's the cycle time. So the cycle time is the sum of all the substation. The process time is the longest time on the system, which is the bottleneck time. And the process time of a station, which is a substation, is for one substation. Now, knowing all of that, so therefore, which means that the system process time is the process time of the bottleneck after dividing by a parallel operation. Now, one subsystem, assume, let's go back to the subway example. Assume instead of having one cashier, you've got two cashiers who's doing the exact same thing. So effectively, sandwiches coming and bottling up, and the cashier was initially taking 3 minutes, but it means the bottleneck here, but then you've got two cashiers. So based on a constant flow, which means that every 1.5 minutes, then a sandwich actually will be coming out. So therefore, that's what it means. If you've got a parallel system in terms of two subsystems operating at the same point in time, doing the same thing, the process system time of that substation is divided by 2. So the system capacity is the inverse of the system system process time, and therefore the system, which basically means assume a whole, and therefore based on this whole, therefore it means that if this is my process time, then it means I can be able to produce X amount in that particular whole. So if you've got 8 hours for the day, and therefore if you have 8 hours for the day and we work out our system process time has been 1.5 minutes, and our capacity is 8 hours divided by 1.5 minutes. And of course, we went through already the process cycle time, which is in terms of the total amount of time. Right. So here's an example that it's from the book, and it's from the book in 299, and similar to what we just talked about here. So you've got two identical lines running. You've got workers in these particular lines. So here you are asked to calculate the system process time, the system capacity, and the system cycle time. So, and therefore, process time, which is the bottleneck time. So if you look at the orders here, which one of them here actually has the largest time? So we got 30 seconds, and you're looking at all of it. So while this one here is 40 seconds, but because it's running in a parallel line, the effective time for this is really 20 seconds. So in fact, the bottleneck is 37.5. So therefore your system process time is actually 37.5. Your system capacity, therefore, is 1 over that particular process time. And your system cycle time is the sum total of it going through. So from order to bread, to fill, to toast, to wrap, that's actually the time. So let's work it out. And therefore, 40 seconds, longest time here, roughly while this has the 2, then divide by 2, and that's effective 20, and therefore the process time is actually 25.2. And then per hour, it's how much per hour, and then because it's 1, we're looking at 1 hour, and therefore in terms of that 1 hour, it's 1 divided by 37.5, and you could get 96 hours. And if you were looking at 1 in terms of a day, then it would be 60 multiplied by 12. Your process time, which means that you add each one of them, and that's your process cycle time. And again, if the question is, if Howard hired an additional wrapper, what will be the new capacity? So we just actually add another wrapper, so which effectively mean we divide that by 2. So the largest time now at a station is actually at the order, which is 30. So the bottleneck now becomes 30. Now, sometimes in your process, when you're looking at the process, you may have a duplicate process in terms of 2 things happening in parallel. In case where you have 2 things happening in parallel, you have to observe this as 2 separate processes. So first you'll have to observe it with the cleaning, and then you'll have to observe it with X-ray. So in terms of analyzing it, you would then have to do 2 different set of analysis, one in terms of cleaning and one in terms of X-ray. While it's a parallel process, it's not the exact same process, and hence you have to treat it differently. Yeah, which is kind of like what we just examined here. So in terms of the different parts, and therefore one part is cleaning part is 46, and the X-ray part is 27. The longest part involved, of course, with the hygienist, which is the cleaning. Right, and therefore in managing your constraints, the way, of course, to do it is first we got to know where the constraint is. We look at a way to overcome it. We look at how can we use resources to do it, and therefore we reduce our time in terms of that. So in terms of bottleneck management, of course, you can try to try to shift the wrong system in terms of doing something at the bottleneck, whether or not you could look at ways to increase your capacity or to reduce the subsystems or change up what is going on in the actual system. But in all cases, when you're looking at bottleneck, you then look to see, can I add a parallel process to be able to reduce the effective capacity? Or in terms of the bottleneck, can I break it up into 2 different pieces and therefore have 2 different set of resource subsystems operating in terms of it? So basically what you're trying to do is reduce bottlenecks so that you can increase throughput. Right, so looking at your capacity, and therefore this is how much I can produce. But while we're looking at how much we can produce, are we in fact breaking even? So in terms of how much, at what capacity basically would it be when we in fact break even? So break even is a way for us to be able to determine whether the capacity or our production level or throughput is in fact covering our cost. And in terms of costs, there are two types of costs, which is fixed costs and variable costs. Fixed costs is costs that you have to cover whether you make one product or not, which is like your permanent staff, your utilities, your rent, etc. Variable cost is generally associated to produce to the actual product itself, so which means is the material cost, etc. Well, of course, you can break even, of course, and therefore you make assumptions in terms of it. Time value of money is not considered. In terms of thinking of cost and revenue is a linear function, and we know generally cost and revenue is not necessarily linear because it depends on how much you buy. You could get economy of scale, and therefore you get things at a cheaper price, etc. So, but in this instance, we're just assuming everything here is constant. Right. In doing break even, of course, from a graphical standpoint, you make the line here in red is fixed cost. Fixed cost means that is I have to pay this, so it's my rent, my staff, etc., permanent staff, and therefore this is my cost. Once I start to create product, then my cost is equal to my fixed cost plus the variable cost associated with the creation of product. So therefore, in terms of the more product that I produce, and that's volume, and the more product that I produce, my total cost actually goes up. In terms of revenue, on the other hand, once I start to sell, even though I'm selling and I'm making money, but of course, in terms of my total cost, I'm still actually making loss because I have not covered my fixed costs and my variable costs. But there will be a point in time when I am going to cover my revenue is going to cover my total cost. And at this point in time, that's your break even. That's from a graphical standpoint. From a mathematical standpoint, when we work it out, you can actually see, and you would have done that in the NTP tutor, and you've done that in not sure if in financial management or corporate finance. So your break-even point is your fixed cost divided by your selling price minus your cost price. P in this instance is your selling price, and V is your cost price. So it means that my break-even point in numbers, in terms of the minimum number of product that I have to produce, is my fixed cost minus over my selling price minus my cost price, which is my profit margin. So which means it's my fixed cost divided by my profit margin. And that's the minimum amount of product to break even. Because that makes sense. I have to cover my fixed cost, and I can only cover that with profit. And therefore it's profit per unit. So therefore, if I divide my fixed cost by the profit per unit, I would be able to get how much in terms of unit. Putting it in terms of from a dollar standpoint, while they make the same assumption here in terms of fixed costs divided by profit margin multiplied by P, and that's value here. But what they've done is just fix the equation, and therefore in terms of, because if it's P here, it will be F multiplied by P, and this bottom equation multiplied by P. And in a sense, if we take the same equation and you break it down, it becomes fixed costs over 1 minus P over. So this equation here and this equation here is in fact the same thing. But it's, if you calculate how much is it in units, you just multiply it by the cost in terms of the selling price, and that tells you how much is it in terms of dollars. But of course, if you reduce the equation down at the bottom here, it gives you that equation. So that's just from an equation standpoint. The example that was actually used is if you got a fixed cost of $10,000, you've got direct labor of 150 per unit, and in this instance here, that 150 is actually direct labor, it's not fixed cost labor, and therefore it goes into as part of your variable cost. You have your material cost, and therefore your fixed costs in terms of, well, here they do it and use that equation, which is F over 1 minus V over P, and here for this is in terms of dollars, and we kind of do it differently in terms of F over P minus V, which is your fixed cost, which is $10,000, over P minus V, and P in terms of my selling price is actually 4. My variable cost is 1.5 multiplied by 0.75, and therefore that's my unit. And if you take this unit and you multiply it by the selling price, you would in fact get back the same number here. And this is it in terms of graphical way. Now, having done it from a single unit, of course, in most cases, organizations do not have one product line, they've got multiple product line. And in this instance here, we want to be able to calculate what is the break even in dollars if you've got multiple product line. Thing is, we've got to cover our fixed costs. So we're using the exact same equation, fixed cost over 1 minus V over P. But in this instance, since we've got multiple product, we're looking at the contribution, which is the WI, the percentage contribution of this particular product. So it's the F over 1 minus V over P multiplied by the weighted contribution, and then we are summing all of that. So that's the exact same equation, just placed in terms of that way. Yep. Right, so if you're looking at it as an example, and again, remember the equation here is what we're using here, 1 minus V over P multiplied by the weighted contribution. So we've got our fixed cost, and that's what we have to cover. And therefore, this is our different product line. We have our selling price, we have our cost price, and we've got our expected sales cost. And therefore, we can calculate from this in terms of our total expected cost. We can get what contribution of our expected cost each one of these things are. So therefore, which means I would have had to add all of this, take this, which is my total contribution from that particular sandwich, divided by my total amount, and then get my total, my weighted contribution. So let's put it again here. So this was all my stuff, my selling price, my cost price. Remember from the equation is 1 minus V over P. So V over P is this. 1 minus V over P is that. Since this is my annual forecasted sales in terms of sandwiches, that was actually given to us. This is what we got. So if this was a forecasted sales, and then this is the total sales in terms of everything was 46,000. So the percentage of sales is actually 20,000 divided by 46, and that's the percentage of sales. So if this is a percentage of sales, then my weighted contribution, which is this percentage of sales multiplied by 0.58. So therefore, it's this multiplied by this, and therefore we come up with all of that. So we're taking the value here, right? So my fixed cost, which was 3.5 per month by 12, and we multiplying, dividing that by the total in terms of the weighted contribution of each one of them, and therefore this is in terms of sales. Let's go back here. So remember, it's fixed costs divided by 1 minus V over P. So we have that, but each one of them has a contribution of, each one of them actually had a percentage contribution towards that, and therefore this is the percentage contribution. And if you look at it, it's actually all equal to 1. Therefore, 1 fixed cost over 1 minus V over P, this V over P here, and therefore 1 minus V over P is here, so which means it's my fixed cost divided by, so therefore V over P multiplied by the contribution, and I'm adding all of that. Yeah. So fixed cost divided by all of that, and therefore which means is that. So if this is it for the year, or a day, we just divide it by the amount of days for the year, and we know how much sales for the day. Good. And if we want to be able to figure out what is it in terms of how much money we'll get from the sandwich, since we know that this is the average sale, forecasted sales for the day in terms of the break even, then it means if this is it in terms of the break even, so my contribution for the day from the sandwich, I multiply my total in terms of the expected for the day for break even, multiply by the contribution, which means, and then of course I divide it by the price of the sandwich itself, then I can figure out how many sandwiches I have to do for the day. Yeah, right. In terms of decisions, because remember when we're talking about economy of scales, etc., we also made a point that sometimes you may actually have to make a decision to buy different equipment. And therefore, that's what is called the expected monetary equipment in terms of your capacity. So it depends on your capacity. Either you purchase something, either you fix the process in terms of change the process, or of course, you have the option of doing nothing. So which means here's we're going to use the decision tree to be able to do that. And the example here was actually with a hospital, and therefore the hospital is actually making some decisions to be able to buy some equipment. Now, in terms of the example in the book, in terms of that expected demand, the probability of it being favorable was 40%, has been unfavorable in terms of 60%. So, which means that for a large plant, then it means if it's favorable, I expect to make this amount of money. If it's unfavorable, then I expect to lose this amount of money. You do that for each one of them. And of course, in terms of the do nothing, then you need to work it out. So as my economic value is 0.4 multiplied by this plus 0.6 multiplied by this. And therefore my economic value for the large plant is 14 minus 14,000. And then when I work it out for each one of them, because it would have been 0.4 multiplied by 60 plus 0.6 multiplied by minus 10, that gives you 18. For the small, 0.4 multiplied by 40 plus 0.6 multiplied by 5, that gives us 13. Therefore, if I do absolutely nothing, then I have nothing to lose, which means when I'm looking at the whole thing, it makes sense in terms of me choosing a medium plant. And therefore, that's how you use a decision table to help you in terms of making a decision. Now, so that means these are your assignments. So this is your third assignment. And for each one of the different theoretical concepts that I covered, these assignments actually deal with all of that. This is capacity and utility, bottleneck, multi-factor, and economic monetary value. So therefore, all different concepts are being tested. Okay. All right. Thank you. Let me stop recording.